thank you guys for all your responses on this Burgundian NERF video I made. And I actually wanted to take the time to respond to your guys' comments, kind of as a reaction. So I'm going to go through the comments and give you my opinion on them, and let's just do it. So first we have, you were right and a perfect player. I was not forced to type this. I could definitely agree with that. I am a perfect player. Nothing else I can say there. I like how I pinned this on the top. Pretty genius move of my part. Interestingly enough, this is the most liked comment on my channel, I believe, which is interesting. So I'm going to read it for you. The BU is fun precisely because every Christian nation can get it. To bound it to just France Austria would be horrific, since it would further railroad the trajectory of a game, the enjoyment of which is very much driven by the consequences of unexpected events accumulating over centuries to just a couple of outcomes. Now consider that most games don't reach the 1600s. By analogy, we could argue that the PU Poland gets or Lithuania is broken, or that the Iberian wedding is undesirable since it gives Castile free dev. In terms of balance, the ship was sailed many moons ago with the continuously updated and beefed up mission trees providing advantages unavailable to less popular nations. EU4 is a dozen years old at this point. Let us balance rest. The BU is far from the biggest offender, and it's valuable since it provides a very meaningful way in which power dynamics in Europe can shift in a moment. The player can choose whether to interfere or not. So let me I guess break this down. There's a lot of points so I'm going to break this down to a few different points. First, I look at this. This brings my attention. I'm not sure why we're relating the PU Poland and gets over Lithuania or the Iberian wedding, because these are scripted to one nation. So why are we comparing these? It's kind of, I don't really understand. That just doesn't really make sense. Like, you're almost arguing my point for me. Like, I think it should be scripted like these ones are. So I don't really know why we're using this analogy here. Your next point I can actually agree with in some ways, that I don't really appreciate it, or I don't love that you have these nations that have insane mission trees that are just really fun, like England's, France's, Ottomans, right? They have these like really advanced mission trees that are insanely strong. Now, do I think that getting the Burgundian inheritance makes up for that, or it's kind of like, I see your point, but I think the solution is buffing, making more mission trees strong rather than, even involving the Burgundian inheritance in that conversation. When we say that the Burgundian inheritance is far from the biggest offender, just because this is far from the biggest offender does not mean that it shouldn't be addressed, right? And your last point, the player can choose whether to interfere or not. I would argue that as well, because more or less the player, I mean, if the player doesn't want to be min-max, then they can choose to not, I suppose. But if the player wants to have a good campaign, they are pretty much forced into doing it, in my opinion. Like, you're obviously just missing out on 300 dev if you don't do it. But I guess if you like to, intentionally sabotage your game, I suppose I can get behind that. All right, moving on. Let's see the replies here. The thing is, letting countries that were originally Catholic or Christians absolutely broken. He's referring to my Ottomans, I believe. And yes, I agree. There's no way the Ottomans should be able to get it. Yeah, I agree with this point, man. Even though EU4 is 10 years old, it's very much an alive game, and I do consider it should still be balanced. I'd love to play outside of Europe, and when I can finally see Europe, some never heard opium's emperor that's PU'd England and sometimes Austria and France, not even on the map often. That's because Burgundian was inherited by a wild card. Part of the fun for me. So he's kind of saying that when you're playing outside of Europe, it's interesting because it can really affect RNG in a lot of ways. I don't disagree with that. My problem is when you're playing inside of Europe, right? It's the player getting the event. It's the problem for me, not the AI. I don't think the inheritance is too strong, especially when you consider the incredibly strong mission trees all around. Limiting the inheritance to just Austria France would definitely lose out in its balanced fun equation. Do you ever agree the horse event could be removed and it wouldn't change much? Okay. Yeah, and I do agree the horse part is the problem, not the inheritance itself. So our next comment says, my fix for the inheritance would be a bit more rework of the royal marriage system. I think each royal marriage should be tied to prestige and power projection. The more you have, the better the great power you can marry. For example, if you have low prestige and power projection, you can only royal marriage countries that have less development than you or have less prestige and power projection than you. Plus or minus high relations. If you have high prestige and power projection, you can marry into bigger dynasties or anyone that has less development than you. I think it would make more sense in the system right now. Also, because royal marriage would be harder to get, the nation should get Diplo rep if they marry into a prestigious nation or a bigger dynasty. Royal marriage slots should be capped at like 3 or something. But you can also lose Diplo rep if you have a royal marriage with a nation that lost prestige or doesn't have enough prestige and power projection to keep up with your level. Keep in mind, if you would be the country that has the lesser prestige and power projection plus or minus dev, you would gain diplomatic reputation at the cost of relations with the married country. This way, Burgundy, because it's a great power, could only get royal marriage offers from powers that are either prestigious enough, with strong projection for marriage, or have development around the same as them. This would eliminate lesser powers from getting the inheritance, but would make it slightly harder to enter the marriage game. Also, it would make some cast abilities give more prestige and power projection than others. Like the Insular Trade War CB and the Conquest or Reconquest CB would give significantly less, even if you cancel some rivals. I like this a lot, actually. This post is very well thought out, too, so I appreciate you taking the time to explain your fix. I love your guys' interaction, honestly. Even if I disagree with you, I love that you guys are, engaging with everyone, and yeah, it's cool to see. So I think this would be really cool, actually, because then it makes more sense to me, right? It's kind of saying, like, hey, so what they're kind of saying is, like, why would Burgundy really want to royal marriage with an OPM anyways? What do they have to gain from that? And I think that makes a lot of sense, in terms of, like, if this was this was, like, that time period, right? Like, what advantage would Burgundy have? Obviously, there's a huge advantage of them, like, royal marrying to Castile or France or, Austria, right? That makes sense, because they're, like, marrying into a very powerful house, but, like, why would they want to marry into a very weak house? They don't have much to gain from that. So I actually like that idea. I like that concept. I'm only going to be including the comments that I think kind of move towards the discussion. So just so you guys know, I won't be reading every comment, more ones that kind of either propose something, tell me I'm wrong, or that are kind of interesting in some way. You could limit who can get the inheritance to a country having over a set limit of dev, and that would disallow all the OPMs, but lets the players still be able to get if they expand. I like that. I can see that being, and that is kind of like my problem with it, is that you should have to be a strong nation to royal marry. I really like this. This person that talked about the royal marriage system and kind of making sense, right? Like, why would alliances like seem that they don't want to be mutually beneficial? Doesn't really make sense to ally a weaker nation and royal marry into their house. So that makes a lot of sense, and dev would be a good indicator of that as well. Most big European countries have 2 OP mission trees, which involve PU massive countries or other missions which are way too OP. The BU to them is a side quest. And if you're a small nation in Europe, having that buffer on can make for some fun runs. So I think your argument there is, again, going back to that, like, they should just fix mission trees, right? That's my opinion when I look at this. I'm like, rather than having to have the Burgundian inheritance because you're a small nation and you have no other options, I would rather them kind of rework the mission trees and make other nations, more viable. Everything in EU4 is OP, really. I think balance plays second fiddle to fun, which is okay by me. Not like there's a competitive EU4 scene that earns Delta 2 levels of money each year or whatever, so who cares, right? It's a predominantly single-player game. If you don't want to go for the BI because you feel it's too strong, you always have the option to not do it. So I disagree with this post. I think that there might be a competitive scene, but I enjoy the game because it's challenging, and I think a lot of people care, right? And I'm not going to intentionally, like, handicap myself to not do, like, to do. I'm basically, it's like, I'm not just going to not take the Burgundian inheritance for no reason other than I'm trying to self-sabotage my game. It's not my job to regulate things like that, right? It's Paradox's job. I'm not going to be here, like, trying to make my game fun by handicapping myself. That's not my play style. Maybe it works for some of you guys, but it doesn't work for me. Yes, allow only France, Austria, or the Emperor to get the inheritance and give the chance for the other 2 to contest it. I like this. I even hearted it, as you can see. The BI is not very realistic since it was Castile, the one who actually inherits the lands, and gave priors France and Austria, plus small nation inheriting that much land. Yeah, I agree with that. Maybe do something like needing at least 50% of Burgundy's dev to be eligible. Yeah, I think that could be okay. This guy's just further making his point that he cites Burgundian inheritance with every nation: Romania, Serbia, Croatia, Albania, Wales, Athens, and Avars. And it makes them extremely powerful, and this is basically pointing out the problem. The only change I would make would be to have France go to war versus Burgundy once Charles dies in 1v1. France would win and get a scripted, I assume we meant peace deal, to take everything in the France region. If you're Asia Emperor or Austria, you get to keep the geographical Burgundian lands in the French scripted peace deal. Also, France can't get the inheritance anymore, and Austria is much more likely to get it. Once Austria gets it, he also annexes a bit more than the Netherlands. This would make Austria a legit strong tag even in AI hands. It would make Giga France possible. Probably help Netherlands spawn a lot more because Austria won't have a land connection to the Netherlands, and also increase the chance for the event where if Spain gets a Habsburg, they take over the Netherlands, which is a super cool event. In terms of balance, it means that if tags other than Austria got an inheritance, it's now much smaller. Also, I would make a Dutch revolt pretty much inevitable to have a trade-off. You can get dev now if you have a deal to make Dutch later. Maybe the Burgundian Netherlands turns into a special subject, and once the revolt hits the annex half of it, which with the other half going to the Netherlands. No, I love the Burgundian inheritance. Just let me kiss the horse, please. I'm not good at the game. That's funny. I respect the honesty. I agree, but maybe only Christian great power should be able to get it. Yeah, I like that. I feel like a simple restriction of being either France Emperor or boarding Burgundy would be a decent idea, or at the very least, in getting the horse event. Having to manually integrate Burgundy makes it a lot more balanced and also aligns more with precedent of the Iberian wedding, where it's not possible to quickly integrate a large PU. And if it's just boarding to get the horseman, it's pretty doable. As negotiations means you have to take a chunk of aid if at the Emperor, or if it's just Emperor that can get it, that argument makes sense. France can get it through mission anyways, and doable to take advantage of it. Any nation restriction you need the Emperor, which itself gives you large boost of strength. Okay, I can see the points here. Single player game, things could be OP, relatively historical. I believe that historically it's had to do with Spain, so or Castile, so maybe it's, I don't know if it is historical. No BU nerf. If they nerf that, then no PU for Austria, Hungary, Poland, Lithuania. Honestly, if you're going to nerf one of the few PUs France can get besides Milan or Naples and Bohemia, Castle, Hungary, Poland, and Aragon are fair game too. So what is this person, like a France lover? And they're like, you can't take away my PU from France. That's just kind of the vibes I get from this one. I think there should be a mild limiting mechanic in terms of minimum dev required. I generally think it's a bad idea to force players they can choose to exploit it or not. If you want an easy game, sure, go for the inheritance. I wouldn't presume it because doing the same shot with every country is kind of pointless in my book, but that's okay. Again, this is, from my perspective, I'm not going to force myself to play worse. I want the game to force that challenge. Like, I don't want to just intentionally play worse for no reason. Other than, I guess, I can, right? I like the idea of making 0 RNG and have Castle Spain have it, like it historically happened. Okay, I could agree. Honestly, if it historically happened that way, I don't see why they don't do it that way. I would rather see the Dutch Revolt get buffed. I think that actually is something I would really like. But I'll talk about that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later. But I actually really resonate with this. I think the Burgundian inheritance is critical for Opium's Europe to build an economic power base. The 220 to 300 tech dev really helps. Of course it helps. It's ridiculous on a dev. Inheriting a great power definitely helps your dev. Yes, I would agree there. And I guess he's saying, no to Serbia to get Kosovo, Gold Mine, no to be Ireland for preliminary range, and no to be murder for eastward expansion, be Catholic and become emperor from empire, pick exploration so you can conquer the gold mines. I feel like this person is just like saying like, oh, these other things are also really strong. I don't really think they're nearly as strong as this, so I don't know about that one. I've had issues with the way the Burgundian inheritance works ever since Emperor. The main issue is that it's just not historic. No one country should get the full Burgundian inheritance, and if they do not cede some land, it should be considered an offensive war for them. Totally agree. It being a defensive war makes it so easy. It's crazy. The two Burgundy, the state of East and West Burgundy, were under the French domain. For example, if Austria refuses to cede that to France, the resulting war should be considered an offensive war for Austria. Too often I see France disappear just because Austria gets full inheritance, and then France declares into Austria's huge alliance network. But yes, this happens all the time. Or Austria inherits Burgundy and the vital interests, and then vital interests half of France. They should be balanced. The land is shared as it historically was. Yes, I agree. If a third country wins, it's then same principle. They can offer to cede the two Burgundies to France or lowlands into the HREF. Otherwise, it's an offensive war. I agree, it's a mess and there's so much unclarity. I think at most just lower the overall amount of dev in Burgundy. Possibly. Like that anyone can have it honestly. No, do not come up with any more ideas. This is a terrible idea. Let's make the game harder. Dude, you need to rethink who plays this. Do you think this is a powerful, then let's get rid of PUs altogether because I've PU'd half of Europe because getting the VIU. Need to play some more and get back to me when you put in 10,000 hours. Alright. This guy clearly thinks that I need to put in, 10,000 hours before I'm allowed to have opinions. So, I don't have to think about that one. Again, I want to thank you guys for chipping in on this. I'm actually going to be doing this type of video weekly where I'm going to be discussing a topic that I have an opinion on, and because I thought it was a lot of fun, and then I'll probably do a follow-up like I am now. Next week, I'm going to talk about the estates or the HRE. I haven't decided yet. Maybe let me know in the comments if you guys would prefer a conversation about the HRE or the estates. I kind of wanted to wrap up my thoughts on this from kind of what I think about what you guys said. First off, I don't agree with comparing any other PU to this PU because other PUs are generally scripted to one nation, so that's not a very good comparison in my opinion. Not every nation can just get Lithuania randomly. Not everyone can just get Aragon randomly, right? Why would we compare that? The Burgundian inheritance. It doesn't really make sense. The second point I would say is I like a lot of the points saying that you should have to have a certain amount of dev to get a Royal Marriage with Burgundy, or at least get the event with Burgundy, right? Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And maybe a complete rework of the Royal Marriage system as that individual mentioned would be really cool, right? Why are these big nations marrying into opiums anyways? Doesn't really make a lot of sense. And my final thought for me, and this one's kind of a little bit abstract, but what if they made the Dutch Revolt like super real, right? and kind of unavoidable. Right now, just moving your capital is so easy. I think they should disable that completely. Moving your capital shouldn't do anything, in my opinion. Make the event like legitimately almost inevitable, and also when it happens, make it that even the player would basically spawn the Netherlands no matter what. Maybe just make the Netherlands spawn no matter what. I don't know. I like that a lot. I think the Dutch revolt is a joke. Even if you let it trigger, which you don't even have to, even if you let it trigger, it's not that big of a deal. You just fight some rebels for a little bit of time. I would be perfectly fine with just like, the Netherlands breaks free, scripted event, happens every time. And with that, I'll wrap up this video, and yeah, let me know if you guys like these discussion videos, and if you do, what do you want to discuss next? The estates or the HRE? And when I say the HRE, I specifically mean kind of the topic of I think the HRE is too easy to dismantle, and I kind of would go into detail on that. And the estates is more of a discussion of me hating the estates. Anyways, enjoy.